Oh, okay. Well, my tears are done. Just, I don't know why I'm so emotional, but I just feel so deeply resonant with your work, Veronica. And it is truly, truly an honor to have you here today. From the very moment, I think the very first chapter I read in Synchronosophy that you've been serializing over on Substack, I felt an immediate resonance. And you carry a deep trust in life's intelligence and are in some ways not rejecting, because that's not none of your work is about rejecting, but understanding that those rigid frameworks no longer serve us. And you instead are favoring something wilder, something more symbiotic, something deeply alive. And I see your writing as an invitation, similar to some of the unfixed work that I do, to step into uncertainty, and not as like a failure of control, but as the very ground of creativity and transformation and deep listening. So I'm thrilled to introduce our listeners and watchers and readers to your work. I already know people that are like, in fact, I just had a meeting the other day with an old family friend who is like quoting your work. She's obsessed with it. So, because I forward your Substack chapters to people. So I'm thrilled to begin and to back everybody up, because this is a lot. um, when in 1999, when Synchronosophy first arrived, and I know it probably wasn't called that, it first arrived in your life, not as something you were really looking for, but as something that found you. You've described it as almost kind of like a mental download, and was answering a lot of questions that you didn't yet know you were even asking. So take us back to that moment. What did it feel like to receive something so unexpected? And how did that shape your path ahead?
Yeah, unexpected. Yes, I have never had anything like that before or after. So the only way I can describe it is as it happened then. And it was really like, I was writing, I had a practice of writing morning pages, and that I think the listeners are fairly familiar with that. You write 3 pages and that's it. And then you're allowed to get on with your life. Only in my case, that didn't happen. After the 3 pages, it just suddenly, it was within that practice, it just suddenly started pouring in. And I somehow knew that it was important. I didn't quite understand what it was about, although I had an inkling, but it was sort of an intuitive knowing, but not really fully grasping. I mean, that took years, that took decades even. I'm still in the process of fully understanding, actually. And it was, I then very quickly understood that it was a very specific model of human consciousness, but not as a general, this is how it is for everyone. It was, and my very specific focus was subjective experience. So this is human consciousness from the perspective, through the lens of subjective experience, which just, there are literally, I have since discovered there are hundreds of models of human consciousness, which I didn't know. And I was not looking. I mean, I would have thought this is very presumptuous to even look for that. But that I knew it was that, and I knew it was from the perspective of subjective experience, which is very different from the scientific perspective, where you always are looking for the theory of everything and the ultimate truth and that kind of thing. It's not that. It is,
Yeah.
but what I discovered then was that if you go deep into something through subjective experience, you connect with subjective experience of everybody, you know. And it is like, that's why you can discover the universe in a grain of sand, for example. It is exactly like that. And not only was it just a subjective experience, it was also a very specific moment in subjective experience that then became the practice, you know.
And can you describe, just to back up for people, that what is the practice in a, I know it's very deep and rich, but what is the practice? And I know you were even saying you were practicing on yourself last night. So let's give it kind of like a concrete example.
Okay. Well, I did not invent this practice, I have to say first, because I had a training in classical homeopathy and also in psychosynthesis, which I did in parallel. And my particular classical homeopathy training was very much focused on the mental states. Even though we were taught to the normal case taking and what um, and then to prescribe a remedy, but there was always this focus on the mental state, and through the practice in psychosynthesis, if people are not familiar with that, that is really a kind of transpersonal. It comes from the transpersonal psychotherapy um, uh, framework, but it is mainly used not as a therapy, but as a work on yourself.
Mm.
And so I had used that before because I was familiar. That was how I was trained. And I used totally the homeopathic approach, which has nothing to do with the remedies. It is the philosophy that any symptom, and a symptom I very broadly would describe anything that goes wrong in your life,
Mm.
anything that you don't want, that is kind of an irritation. Let's say an irritation, an internal turmoil, a turbulent irritation, a turbulent reaction to something that happens on the outside. But
Mm.
it's your personal irritation, so it's yours. Never mind
Mhm.
what happens on the outside. It's yours. So you claim that as yours, and so that principle is a big part of the practice, that you just don't question that ever.
Mm.
That if it happens to you, it's yours. It's yours for the taking, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And 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 that is very different from what I would call the allopathic approach. Is that you always blame something outside? Oh, in homeopathy we don't look for this causation from the outside. We look for, uh, isn't that interesting how this particular system responds in this particular way, and this is how then the classical homeopath will find the remedy.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, and what I was interested in was, apart from my own work, was also I was working as a homeopath at the time, so I was also interested in cutting out all the remedies. And because I thought, if the remedy is information, why can't we go straight to the information? And because
Yeah.
I was also working as a simultaneous translator at the time, interpreter at homeopathic conferences at the time. So I saw a lot of all the greats on the circuit at the time in homeopathy, from America, from South Africa, from all over the world, really. And I saw that how quickly, when you when you work with a client, that people start looking at them through the lens of the remedy.
Mm.
You can almost see the mind bubbles. Oh, there's arsenicum album coming up, and there's aconitum coming up, and
Oh, wow.
these kind of things. And I thought, no, I don't want that. I don't want to lose that connection with the person.
Wow.
So that was happening. And what I also had was the practice of psychosynthesis, which is working very much with the imagination.
Mm.
So what I did last night, I can tell you what I did last night.
Yeah.
So what I do is then, the first thing I always do is tune into the emotions. I tune into, how do I feel, and I sometimes I put words to it, but I don't need to. And I of course I have done this now for 25 years plus, and it's very quick. I'm just straight in there, and I know how I feel, and then I amplify that,
Mm.
because I want to know really what it is. Why is it really, why is this such a big deal?
Mm.
And then from the emotion, and that's the psychosynthesis part, I translate this, because I'm a translator. So I see these as languages. I
Yeah.
see these as inner languages. Then I translate this into an image. and it is basically a story in the mind. It's like an internal movie going on, right? So I translate this into this internal movie, and then I don't remember whether last night I even had something like that, but but it could be something like I feel very upset and I feel very scared and helpless, and then I have spontaneously this image coming up of being in the ocean on a life raft and there's nobody and I'm all on my own, and then and just having that whatever, and it what is important is that it has to be spontaneous.
Mm.
It has to really come from within. It's not an external image that you choose so-called consciously or
Yeah.
with awareness. It's not intentional. It is, you have to let it come from the deeper place.
Yeah. Interesting.
And that image already, if you're familiar with the practice, once you tune into that practice, you notice that just the image coming up, then that immediately provides a relief, because you say, oh, I'm on this life raft in the ocean. It makes perfect sense that I'm upset. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you don't
Mm.
you don't connect it with something that happened externally. It's all
Yes.
inside,
That makes so much sense.
right?
Wow. And this is, um, you wrote about how back in the 90s, we were infiltrated with a lot of self-help books and about like
Mm,
how to get everything you want. And while, and this is very different than that. And in a way you even were like, I can't handle any more of this type of content. And I was at that same place where it felt like the world was telling me how to fix myself, how to fix myself. And I had to finally let all of that go and turn toward the discomfort, which in a way is kind of like what you're saying. So tell me a
right.
little bit about what that was like for you when you turned off the self-help books and had to just pause. What was it that you were turning toward?
Well, I was turning towards myself. I
Mm,
was for me it was not a physical, well, it was physical as well, but it was really uh, in the context of relationships. I had a complete life crash, and I came out of a relationship which became so disastrous that I had to basically flee from my own life. I became a refugee from my own life, and with two small children and death threats, and and I just but the funny thing was I never saw myself as a victim.
mm,
I somehow knew, for somehow unintentionally, I had gotten myself into this.
mm,
So I took full responsibility. I never looked for external help, really. A little bit, yes, and I did receive help. I did. I had angels coming into my
mm,
life in those moments. I really did. But what happened was that I took responsibility and immediately asked myself the question: How could this possibly? In a way, yes. How could this possibly happen to me? I was completely surprised in some
mhm.
way, because nobody, that was not on my radar in my whole family. It was not, I don't come from any kind of violent background. It
Mhm.
was all very gentle and very naive in many ways.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think we relate with that.
So that was what happened, and I described that in one of the early chapters. So that was really, I then understood, and there were several relationships before that I could see how, and I understood patterns, because that's how I'd been trained in classical homeopathy. So life
Mhm.
patterns, and then I thought, oh, this is obviously a life pattern, um, which I didn't recognize from my family. My parents were happily married. My grandparents, everybody was happily married apart from me crashing all the time.
Yeah.
So I couldn't understand it, but I also then saw what I came out with. Then I came to this point where I thought, you know, this is it's finished. It's really it's I reached what I call the point of enoughness. You reach
Yeah.
that point where you say,
Yeah.
this can't go on. And if not for I was to the point of feeling suicidal, but but I had two small kids and an older son who was still living with his father at the time, and because of them, I couldn't just throw in the towel. It was really my kids who in energetically really and through the responsibility that pulled me through.
Yeah.
Um, but it felt, of course, disastrous, and
Mhm.
I felt so ashamed, and I didn't want, and I also, in relation to my family, I didn't want anyone to worry about me, and so I think the biggest feeling that I had to confront was the shame.
Mm. Wow.
That was almost bigger than the fear.
Wow. Wow.
That
And
was
you're
that was
saying,
interesting.
yeah, I'm hearing, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that you were, obviously exiting a bad situation, but also in that process turning toward yourself, which meant you weren't going to avoid those negative emotions anymore, which you're saying were shame.
Um,
Instead, kind of embracing and diving straight into them.
I never avoided my emotions. I
Mm,
don't think I ever did that. But it was just that what happened was that I was always trying to make things work. I was, I was very much, I get, yeah, I was very much a people pleaser,
yeah.
and I was also very easily fitting around other people, even though I was always strong. But it was like my resources were very attractive to other people, because
Hmm.
I could, and and it was always in relationships where these guys were actually much weaker than me,
Mm,
but and I was always supporting them, but then they demanded more and more and more, and and in the end it was in a situation where it was someone who was were probably in quite a disturbed kind of place. But I had no experience of that, so I didn't recognize the cues, the early
yeah.
cues. In
Yeah.
retrospective, of course, I could see it all, but when I was in it, and then suddenly, when I was in it, I thought, "Oh my God, this is how women get into these situations," and I
Right.
never thought that would happen to me.
Right. And that's, I think, we talk about trauma, and you actually write about trauma as well, and in a different way than it's talked about. And I think trauma can sometimes be that veil, that keeps us in these cycles. And so when you write about trauma, it's more of like integral to the human experience, and part of shaping consciousness is what you say is sort of a non-linear system. So how do you see trauma as a generative force rather than something to be healed or resolved?
Well, I think it needs to be healed and resolved as well.
Mm.
But in my particular experience, I didn't have a terrible childhood. I did not. I did not have an abusive father. On the contrary, I had a lovely father, and I didn't have any violence or terrible things happen to me in my early years. And but what did happen in my whole family and also in previous generations was that the emotions were not acknowledged, and
Mm.
that you, even though it was all kind of this perfect family and perfect childhood, you couldn't be yourself.
Yeah.
You had to fit into this perfection, and if anything was wrong, it was all I always blamed myself. It was always there must be something wrong with me. And so I had um, I was constantly negotiating, even though I didn't know that at the time, of course. But I can see it on the photos. I can see that probably I lost it at the age of 3 or something like that. You know,
Yeah.
I can see at the age of 3, I'm still kind of this open face and this trusting the world to a point, although
Hmm.
I already knew and I already had moved 3 times by the age of 3, so my parents had already emigrated to the Middle East. By then, I had already moved a few times, and then that's where I spent my childhood. But so I can see how it's all entangled, and that also, I do believe that we all carry ancestral trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yes.
that I can see that my parents and grandparents, the previous generations, they didn't have the tools to work through this. I mean, it was only in my generation, in the late 20th century, really, that trauma became even a thing,
Yeah.
in that
Mm,
way.
yeah.
Before it was, and it was also always something that is, trauma is something terrible that happens to someone, like in a war or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so I never saw myself as someone who had anything to do with that. It was, yeah, that happens to other people. And but what I experienced, and I think what I'm not the only one. I think that there are quite a few people, and you see it in the literature, you see it in the trauma memoirs. It's quite a new genre, really.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so of course, I've read a lot of, and I continuously read these kind of things. Um, that um, people realized gradually that this is something that affects all of us. It's a collective thing.
Right.
And I know from my grandmother's, my uncle, from my paternal grandmother, he joked that his mother, my father's mother, she always apologized for being born. What is
Mm.
that? What is
Wow.
that? You
Wow.
know, and I know that and both my grandmothers, they were middle class families living in big houses, and the business people, they had big business, and all very, very Christian, very a particular religious um, group they all belonged to, and everything was very, very orderly, and they had staff in the house, and they had,
Mm-hmm.
they were they were well-to-do people, and the women were kind of head of the household staff,
Mm.
right? They were not suffering, but they were very clearly
Suppressing.
stepped down from the man of the house.
Yeah. And we have all of these. So I'm experiencing, as I listen to you, sort of all of these oppressive roles or these rejections of our emotions that our ancestors have experienced, and we do that because it's scary. I mean, anybody, we want to try to, even we want to fix the trauma, and we want to avoid the negative experiences. And synchronosophy, as you describe, instead of trying to avoid these negative experiences, they are there to teach you. We are supposed to lean into them, embrace them, dive into them. So can you, and people are going to be like, what? That's crazy. I don't want to embrace them. So how do you guide
I
people
know.
to navigate that inner wilderness without getting lost?
Yeah, well, I can't work with anyone. It's some people with some people have can't do it, and
Mm,
especially there are people, or maybe also I should say, in the past when I didn't have the full understanding that I have now, it was also harder. But I've experienced people who said if I only suggested that, immediately there was no way. You mean I have to take responsibility what he did to me, And that is that kind of thing. It is this blaming. And of course, with synchronosophy, you don't blame. You
mm-hmm,
just it's not about blaming. It's not, and I always explain, uh, well, if someone is not willing to even look at their own emotions, or not willing, not able, it's
mm-hmm,
you can't judge that. It is also, to a lot of people, it's very, very scary.
mm-hmm.
I think I had the advantage that from I was born like that. I'm very comfortable with my emotions.
Yeah.
I don't. I was never allowed as a child to express my emotions, but I somehow was able to handle that.
Mm,
But it wasn't also it wasn't really, uh, as I said, it was a very gentle, perfect kind of childhood in some ways, very sheltered, very yeah, and very unusual in many ways, because I grew up in a boarding school with with 40 or so, 40 plus Palestinian boys, and my 4 brothers. And I was the only girl, and there were no girls. So I didn't have any friends. I never
Yeah.
had any friends until the age of 12.
Wow.
So that, and to me, that was normal, as it is always to us. Our strange lives
Right.
are normal to us. But I think that contributed to having an intense inner life.
That's what I was going to say. I'm imagining you did have friends. They were just in another realm and
Yes, yes, totally.
wow.
So I was comfortable with my inner life, I
Yeah.
think, because of that.
So
That's
how do
how,
you guide people to other people when they are willing to do this, but there's still some fear around what if this just blows it up? What if it gets bigger? What if, um, how do you work with people's fear?
well, I always encourage people to start small,
Mm,
because the small irritations should not be underestimated. Because I now understand, well, the overall theory is that the subjective human consciousness, or this individual human consciousness, is a living organism. That's the first thing. It's not produced by the brain, it is a living organism, and the brain is part of that. So
mm,
it is so totally inside out and upside down. But that's also not my invention. I then later discovered that it is actually also the theory of the Vedic science of mind. So the ancient Vedic science of mind sees it exactly like that. And
mm,
somehow, even though I didn't know that, I'm not a Vedic scholar. I hadn't read any of that stuff, but I discovered that later, that I must have tuned into that. But all came through this download, this mental download that I describe also in the book. Um, that all this information came, and I just wrote it down without understanding.
mm.
And then it took me years to unravel it. But I knew intuitively to trust it.
Yeah.
I just trusted it, and see, okay, how, and I used it as my personal guidance system. And it has never ever failed me so far. So
Wow.
so when people ask, how do you know, and of course people did ask immediately, and how do you know it's true? Say, doesn't matter. It's a
Yeah.
model.
Yeah.
If it works, it works. And so
Right.
far it's worked.
And you did use yourself for years as the primary person that you were testing this out on. Is that correct?
Well, I had plenty of opportunity. But also with then I soon after, during that time, actually, I was already with my husband, or who then became my husband, Josh. And so we had already met, because I had obviously broken or resolved my destructive relationship pattern, as I call it. And also I worked with whoever wanted to work with me. I worked with groups, I worked with individuals, I worked with friends, I worked with clients who came for homeopathic treatment. But unless there was a clear homeopathic remedy, then I would prescribe that. But otherwise, I would just work with them like this.
Yeah.
And I saw that the results were very similar to giving a homeopathic remedy.
Wow. When I read your work, and you talk about, like you said, this is not some construct from the brain, but an actual, almost like a wilderness. You've described it with all the creatures in the wilderness. And that's
Yeah.
been really helpful for me. Like when you talked about trauma, you said that it includes a nurturing dormant potential.
Mm-hmm.
And so in my mind, I picture almost like this little critter who's just full of kisses and hugs and warmth, and that it's latent, or even you said sometimes it's frozen in the permafrost.
Yes.
Can you
Yes.
describe a little bit about that process of this wilderness?
Yes. Well, as you were talking, I'm thinking of someone who I worked with maybe last year, a couple of years ago, and uh, it was very, yeah. And she didn't know anything about this, but she was completely open to it, and she was also on some kind of medication. So I was cautious,
Mhm.
um, but she was. I think when people are willing to to what I call go into their emotions or meet their own emotions. Not everybody can do it. If they can't do it, then I just say, well, maybe we can do something else, or I can recommend something else, but I don't work with them. If they can't do it, that is really important. That people are willing to actually feel even just a little bit how they feel in relation to something that upsets them. You know, if you can't do that, then I take that just as a guideline and say, well, then maybe this is not the right thing. You know, it's because it's powerful, and I don't want. It is a wilderness, and I don't want people to get lost in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, but I think when I work with people, people also have that. I don't know what's going to happen, and that's what I love about this work. I don't know when I do it myself. I don't know when I do it even with my own family, with my kids. I mean, I'm greatly blessed; they will trust me with this. I've worked with my brothers. I've worked with.
Aw.
It is actually quite incredible, you know.
Yeah.
So that there is this complete trust, and I feel I feel very humble when people work with me like that, and but it is that I think when people work with me, then they know, oh, I'm not alone, and I can. It's just knowing the right questions and what to ask next. That, and I do that quite intuitively, and yeah, that's taken me years to figure out how to explain that, because I can't sit with everybody who wants to do
Right.
this work. What I wanted to do really with this book, what I've been trying to do for the last 25 years, is convey that in such a way that people can do it themselves.
Yeah.
That it is
And
an
I mean, I
empowerment technique, you know?
it is, and it feels that way when I read it. I don't read it your chapters and go, oh, you know, now I have to call Veronika to do a session. It's like, it feels like it's very much. Well, I mean, and I'll give you a little example here. This is kind of a personal example, but I'm not asking for therapy here. But this is one of the
Go
things
for
I've
it.
worked with. I have an incident from when I was very young, pre-verbal, 6 years old. I mean, sorry, 6 months old, maybe even younger. I think my mom said like 5 or 5.5. And she was out with my dad, and they'd hired a babysitter through the university. And long story short, they came home. She was passed out drunk. My brother was upstairs sleeping, and I was cold in a diaper with not crying, almost like not sick or comatose or anything, but not crying anymore, even though it was freezing cold. It was Michigan. And I know for certain that there's something that after probably a period of crying out and being like, I need something, where something in my system said, nobody's there. And I know there's been from very early on this by self attitude that like no one's going to ultimately be there for me. And this especially has been coming up as I've been reading you and around, you know, the launch of my book and all that stuff, where it's this like, can I let this in with Elisa wanting to help me and help the vision get out there? And it keeps on pushing up against, are there other people out there that believe in me and that are going to catch me and hold me? And the good part of the story is when my mom came home, she saw me and she instantly grabbed me and breastfed me and took me to the hospital. I had been hit across the face. Apparently I had a bruise on the face, but I wasn't injured, and I was offered lots of love and all of that. But there is some initial thing that
You had that experience.
mm-hmm,
And that is what I believe, we all have these kind of experiences at a very young age, I believe.
mm-hmm,
Sometimes maybe already in the womb, sometimes we carry it over from something that happened to the mother or father. It doesn't matter. Grandparents, uncle, it doesn't matter. We're all connected in this web of consciousness. But something like that is a very significant experience. And you might find, if you did this kind of work, or if you are triggered by something small, I always say to people, look for when you're triggered by something small, when
yeah,
you have an overreaction to something small. You
yeah,
know, that is much more interesting than a big event and a big reaction or a small reaction, or didn't I cope well with this big event? That's completely uninteresting. because you're
Right.
coping well. What is interesting is when you're not coping well in relation to a small event, when you're sort
Hmm.
of crying your eyes out over whatever, a broken cup or something.
Right. Right.
For
And then you
example.
can feel maybe the transformation. For me, I go back to that image of the little girl or the little infant that's like, oh, I get
Yeah.
it now. No wonder. And
Yeah.
then
No
it's
wonder.
no wonder.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah. And it
And
sort of dissolves it. It's not, I'm not running away from it. And I can let myself feel the like cold and the anxiousness and all of that. But it's like it's held almost in something bigger and
mm,
gentler, maybe like that nurturing dormant potential, like you said.
mhm. Well, that is not what you're describing. That is part of the process. That
Uh-huh.
is not the whole of it. You of course your organism completely remembers this whole thing. But you probably don't. Your memory is not able to reconstruct that.
Yeah.
No, it is
Mm-mm.
from what your mother told you, right?
Exactly. Hmm.
Yeah. So, but what we do in synchronosophy, or the practice, is that we try to really get to it from the inside, rather
Mm.
than rather than the external explanation. Oh, this happened. No wonder I must have felt this and that and the other.
Mm.
Of
I
course,
see.
that makes sense. But the interesting thing is, how did you really subjectively? What was your um, what is still in you, inside you? How did that affect this organism that you are? That
Mm.
is your consciousness. How did this affect you? And
Mm.
that is very specific. And what interests us, and how we get to the dormant potential, is that we then translate that experience into a belief. So if I go back to this example of being on my own on a life raft in the ocean, then I might feel, and it is, I try not to, I can't say never, but sometimes I have to suggest things to people. And then I always say to them, well, you just see whether this resonates or it doesn't. And,
Mm.
and people then can tune in. People sometimes don't find the words, and then they tune in and say, oh no, this is not how it is. And then I say another word, an alternative. Oh yeah, that's what it is. And is there maybe something better? So we work very precisely with
Yeah.
this. What is your word for this? Which
Mm.
is a little bit similar to the felt sense from, if you're familiar with the technique of focusing.
No, I'm
Fo-
not.
no,
Mm.
focusing, Eugene Gentlin, and that
Mm-mm.
is, he worked closely with Carl Rogers in
Uh-huh.
Chicago, I
Yep.
think, and he was a philosopher, and he developed this technique called focusing. It's brilliant. And he said, no, I don't want to sell this as a technique. Focusing is for everyone. And I feel the same with synchronosophy. Synchronosophy is for everyone. You know,
Mm.
I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
And that is, and this felt sense. I was introduced to that also in my during my university years. Um, and you tune into how you feel, and then find a specific word for it. Does it feel like this? You can find information about that online, or I probably have provided some links, or I can send them again.
Yeah.
But it is very, very useful to work with many different techniques to use that,
Interesting.
so that you specifically find what is your felt sense in this. So if you
Hmm.
tune into you being this 5.5 months old, and being there, not taken care of, basic
Yeah.
needs not met, um, and tuning into that felt sense. But I think, because it's in you, uh, and you're aware of it, you're aware of the story, I would just suggest to wait when something triggers you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, as you're
So
even talking, it's like, oh, it's just so funny that this is the small example. It's longing. I mean, it's just longing. It's longing for contact. And my poor kitties are the victims of this longing, because I am a grabby cat owner, and I am And they're very obliging, but Dave is so much better at just kind of letting them have their space. And I have this I need you now. And so it's a daily encounter with that longing. And the belief I would assume that is with that is that, well, I don't know the belief. I'm not sure, because right now in my life, it's fulfilled. The longing is fulfilled, but maybe it's a too much. The belief is that it's too much, at least with my cats, and my husband. They're all like, okay, no more human contact for a bit. But I mean, this is just fascinating to work with, and I want to. This feels like it's turned over to me, and I feel responsible for that.
No, it's totally okay. It's great because we can use you as an example now.
That's true. I'm fine being used as an example.
So the important thing is not to go too much through the head, through what you already know. But to really stay with the experiential. And what I do when I work with people, and that is what I'm trying to encourage people to practice that with themselves. And you don't have to go through the whole process. And there are, as you probably have read, there are 8 faculties. So we go deeper and deeper on there is no hierarchy. They're all equals, but there is a sequence. There is a certain sequence, and we always stay with that sequence. So there's the outermost, which is the body as a faculty of consciousness, and the innermost is the will. And it goes through all the others. But you don't have to, in order to resolve something, you don't always have to go through all of them. But what I did at the end of the book, as I presented it, to just complete the cycle, I took the whole circle, the circle of inner elders, as I call it, to go through that sequence. And it is very significant to go through that sequence and to stay with your own experience, because we are so much trained to look outwards and to give it an intellectual label and to use causation. Oh, this happened, and no wonder I feel like that. That is not what we're looking for. We're not looking for causes, and we're not looking to eliminate causes. What we're looking for is the subjective, the pure experience, that what you really feel. And that is the one that is going to guide you to your innermost, to the next deeper and deeper. And so first, the external adverse event, as I call it, the adverse event will trigger something. If it doesn't trigger you, it's not your adverse event. You forget it. You don't even notice, So if it is an adverse event that triggers you, then that's your adverse event. It doesn't matter how big or small, but preferably it's a relatively small one. We're looking for so-called irrational reactions to a relatively small adverse event. And they're the best because they're not immediately life-threatening. You don't immediately have to call emergency vehicle or something, you can actually go through that either by yourself or with someone who's also familiar with it. And I think it's a great if 2 people can actually do an exchange, because then one person can hold you on the trail, so to speak, and the other person can just let themselves go through the experience. And I've done that many times, of course, with Josh, my husband, but also sometimes he's done it with me. And I would say, no, I need you to do this for me. And I need you to, because I also sometimes need someone. And you're the one who I know who's most familiar with this. Like it or not, you've got to do this now.
No. It's reminding me of all of this just totally flashed back to my head when you were talking. When I lived at Findhorn in my early 20s, they had a dance studio, and I had been a dancer my whole life and had just graduated from college and was no longer had access to a dance studio. And nobody was ever using the dance studio at Findhorn. And so I would go in there in the mornings, and one of the things I started doing was dancing a quality instead of, and the one that really was good for me was longing, like not as longing to fill, but just dancing the experience of longing.
Perfect.
And that, what you just said, is sort of feels like what you were saying. It's not removing the cause. It's not any of the fixing. It's just being in the experience of the pure quality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was very joyful. I mean, it was everything, but ultimately it felt very freeing to let myself feel that feeling. Yeah. Tell me a little bit, Veronika. One of the things I love is we live in an anthropocentric era. Everything is hierarchical. It's even hard to not talk in hierarchical terms when we speak. But for you, everything is on a horizontal playing field. Can you talk a little bit about how your concept of consciousness lives in this horizontal plane and how that differs from what we typically live in?
I'm not sure whether I would call it horizontal, but it is from the outer inner. So there are these. It's like a torus, and I see it like a torus, and it's moving. It's like this moving torus, and so the inner can become the outer, and the outer can become the inner. So
Oh,
so
beautiful.
we're in constant movement. We're not static. That's why I also don't talk about homeostasis, for example, because that is static and it doesn't exist. It is because we are constantly in movement. Otherwise, we would be dead. Static is no
Mm.
longer alive. Life is moving.
Mm.
So that's the way I see it, and I feel it that way. I actually feel it that way, and I feel my interactions with people in that way. I
Yeah.
see I see us I see uh, humans as this, like a cell of, like this, we all are this cell of consciousness, and that is, you could maybe imagine this um like an energy body, like an energy bubble.
Yeah.
And uh it's not like I can see that. I don't Sometimes I do, but not normally, and I don't see your energy bubble right now, for example. So no, I'm not one of these people who has these visions all the time.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not also not the designer who could. I'm not qualified to. At some point, someone will be able to make a nice a visual representation of this. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it's too difficult, and I have seen some visual representations which are very close to how I see it as well.
Yeah.
And so, if we see ourselves as this energy bubble, and this is a cell of consciousness within, uh, imagine 8 billion people on the planet, all a cell of consciousness, and we're constantly moving through and alongside and in and out of each other. We're
Permeable
we're actually
membranes.
we're actually interacting, and it's a semi-permeable membrane.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, there are no fixed boundaries. So no wonder we sometimes have difficulties with boundaries, right? Or no
Right.
wonder we are influenced by someone else's energy, or no wonder we have this very clear in our minds. Oh, when I meet so and so, I'm going to tell them such and such, and the moment they come and to start talking, your whole narrative changes, and
Mm-hmm.
you start telling them something that they want to hear, right?
Yes.
Where did that come from? That's where it comes from.
Yeah. So that's where also this practice of synchronosophy can have tremendous contributions to the larger cultural shifts, I would imagine.
I would think so, and I actually see the individual as also, it's really a microcosm, and that's why if we focus on one specific event, and one adverse event, and our so-called non-rational uh, reaction to it, or overreaction to it, that is significant, because that is one of these immature inner creatures sending a message saying, I'm ready.
Mhm.
Hey, I'm ready. Look at me. Look at me. And then I go there, and I go through that process, and I take it through the imagination, and it could be through dance, for example. That
Mm.
would be, that would be, and I have done that sometimes. And my daughter, who is also much more a performer, and she has done process work, she uses movement much more than I do. Or she's also an artist, she uses drawing. You can then translate the movement into a drawing. We did interesting exercises. We sometimes exchange ideas like that.
Oh,
So,
cool.
so we did, we did interesting exercises like that. And the idea is you switch channels. You
Mm,
take it into the movement, and then it becomes, as you say, it becomes joyous. And why does it become joyous? It's because you allow this inner being to have an expression. It's
mm,
like you are becoming the parent who is discovering this 5-month-old baby on the floor,
mm.
and you are both.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
You
so
become both.
beautiful. That's and that is truly where this is the medicine that the world needs right now, with all the posturing and power, and to be able to imagine the fragile inner beings that are just looking to be held in compassion and
Yes.
given voice.
Yes, and then what happens then when you have given voice to this fragile, vulnerable, immature being? Then you get to the potential. So you
Mm,
have to get there first, and then, because every immature being, all it wants is to belong.
yeah.
That's what it wants. So we have these beings inside us that want to belong, and so it's then, with this practice, we can bring these vulnerable, immature inner beings and bring them in by discovering the potential. And you say, okay, there are different questions that you can ask. That's then the practice. You have a range of possibilities how to go through that door. um, and then also to integrate that potential and to activate it, and in
Mm,
the end to really to not just close the cycle, but to take it around, because it's not a cycle, around the spiral to the next level.
yeah.
And that
Yeah.
is where the integration happens. And when you integrate just one element like that, that contributes to the whole.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not like you're doing this to just this part of you, because it's not a part of you, it's one of your inner creatures, and it affects everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know and it's the same principle, how we do this, how we can do this with individual, uh, apparently small things. We can make these transformational shifts, and how then, bit by bit, not in a linear fashion, but in a kind of, well, like any life grows, really. How does
Yeah.
life grow? It doesn't grow linearly. It always
Right.
grows in spirals. And this is the spiral of growth, that you're giving this, you're not actually doing this. All you're doing is giving a little stimulus here and there. So you
Mm,
do another little impulse, and then you leave it, and then another little impulse, and then you leave it. So don't push. It's like a swing. If you keep pushing, you're pushing further away. You
yeah.
have to let it come back. You have to let it complete the cycle. That's also very important.
Wow. This is just so profound, Veronika. You said the word part. I loved that you brought up the word part, because you said it's not a part of you. And you just wrote about that a few weeks ago. And I'm guilty of that, where it's how we talk about this part of me and then this part of me. And even some of the voice dialogue, that was the therapy that I did a lot of, where you talk to the different parts of yourself. And that truly, your image of the torus and the spiral helps sort of smooth that out, because it's too compartmentalized otherwise.
Hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, so I want to ask you, gosh, this is just such a fabulous conversation. We have like 6 minutes left. Ah! um we can go for a little bit, but I wanted to ask you, how has you've been working with this since 1999. Is there anything that surprised you or changed since you first began? I know the whole thing is evolving, but is there anything that's really surprised you along the way?
Well, I would say it surprises me all the time.
Mm, That's
because
beautiful.
I really never know what's going to happen. And for me, I think that is surprising to a lot of people when I say that. But for me, the biggest, I might have mentioned it or may not. I don't remember now. But for me, the biggest kind of bugbear, my immature inner creature, was to feel inadequate
Mhm.
always. And it was as a child, I always felt, and I was actually thinking about that yesterday, that if I had been born and brought up in the kind of transgender, gender dysmorphia kind of thing, I probably would have put into a program for for transgendering because I wanted to be like everyone else,
Right.
and everyone else in my surroundings was male, and even growing up in an Arabic culture, my parents had 4 children because the word in Arabic for child and boy is the same. I didn't count.
Wow, I didn't
You know,
realize that.
that didn't feel good.
Yeah.
It just, you know, it
Yeah.
just, I wanted to be there too. You know,
Yeah.
I was there, but it always felt like I was kind of an afterthought. And because, and I, yeah, that's just how it was.
Mhm.
And but I do believe that these irritations, that because I started with the question, what is the good reason for negative experience, before I got all this download, and I would say now that it is negative experience makes us alert.
Mm.
I
Yes.
don't I don't notice my toes when everything is fine, but I knock my little toe and then I notice it, It
Yeah.
is the
Yeah.
pain that makes us notice.
That is
So,
so true.
no?
Yes.
So that is one thing, and the other thing is that if we notice these little things and start working with them, then it doesn't have to become so bad. The only reason why we have, in my humble opinion, the only reason why we have this huge mental health crisis and all these terrible situations and violence and whatnot is because so much has been suppressed and neglected for so long,
Mm.
you
Mm.
know, and we can experience it in our own life, and we can experience it um, in the collective. But the only thing that we can really work with is our own.
Yeah.
It's not. I can't go and sort out the world. It's not my job. But it's my job to sort out my stuff. And
Mm.
what was the biggest surprise, I think, or continuously the biggest surprise, is how working with this model that I received, and working with this map. It's like a map of the inner landscape, and working with this map, how this almost every single time it teaches me something new.
Mm.
And
Wow.
only recently, only a couple of weeks ago or so, I came against this inadequacy again, and I'm almost. And I'm just as exasperated as everyone else, I'm not. It's not like, oh great, there we go again. I think,
Yeah.
not again. I feel that too. It's not. I'm not just enlightened, meditating, whatever, floating somewhere above the ground. No, I'm. It's right there, and it feels painful, and it feels irritating, and that's
Mhm.
how I want to feel it. Because if it didn't feel irritating, it would be nothing.
Yeah, then
So
it
I.
wouldn't have that moment of awakening.
So I felt this. I felt exactly. I felt this inadequacy yet again, and my first reaction is, of course, I don't believe this, and it came while I was writing the chapter on the sense of unknowing.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I was writing about that, and then I thought, and you know what? This is what I'm going to do with this time. So I was doing something different from what I usually do. I didn't try to find to fit it in somewhere into a box, whatever, where it's kind of cozy and, you know,
Yeah.
no, I just let it be with a sense of unknowing. And I wouldn't say I sat with it, because I just live my life as, do whatever. And that is the beauty of this practice also, that it's not a practice that, well, sometimes you have to take a little bit of time out, of course, to do an exercise. But once you get used to it, it flows very naturally in and out of your life. And you also don't need to do it every day. You do it, I call it practice on demand. You only practice when something irritates you. Otherwise, you can forget about it.
Yeah.
But it's a tool that you have. It's just your special little power tool box, your toolkit,
Yeah.
and then you can pull it out whenever you need it. And what I did there was just hold it. I said, okay, inadequate. I don't know what this is about. I just accept, and I'm just holding it in this sense of unknowing. And then I think after about, and it took a while, but I wasn't consciously thinking about it all the time. I just did other things. And then after about 48 hours, I had this sudden, like this
Mm.
revelation. And I felt, this is totally okay.
Wow.
It is, of course, I'm inadequate in lots of things,
Wow.
and why wouldn't I, why wouldn't I be? Why wouldn't I
Right.
even, and it suddenly felt completely different than it had ever felt before. Before it was always, oh my God, and I'm still not good enough, and da da da. So I added my story. I
Right.
added the, I added my good old story that always made me feel miserable, and that that just is how we add the story that makes us actually feel miserable. It's not the thing itself; it's
Yeah.
always the story we add, and that's why we
The
need to go into the story.
the image I had when you were talking was of a seed. And it's just under the surface, it's been planted, and I would, if there was a quality that a seed might experience, is inadequacy, because it's got this tough shell. It needs the sun and the rain and the seasons and all these
Absolutely.
other things to line up, but it's not going, gosh darn it, I'm so inadequate. It's just in waiting and experiencing that feeling. And I, that's sort of what you, in those 2 days where you decided to sit with it, I was just picturing this little seed just waiting for the
Mm,
rain.
mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that also, and that also, so there's a lot in that experience. It's also what you say with the seed. Absolutely, there has to be the opportune moment, and that is what I call the kairos, or the kairotrophy. The kairos is the opportune moment, and then we nurture in the opportune moment. So
Yeah.
it's not, you don't stuff, you can't stuff. It's like your body. You don't stuff all the food that you need for your whole lifetime into this body, and then that's it. You're done. That's not how it
Yeah.
works.
Wow.
you know.
Oh my gosh. Okay. One last question, because this is just thrilling. And I love how, thank you for, sharing your own personal journey with this too, and letting me share some of mine, because I feel like it'll help people feel like how applicable and
Mm,
powerful this
yeah,
is.
yeah,
But speaking of Kairos, your very first post in the Synchronosophy series was published on the anniversary of your brother Jacob's death,
yes.
and sort of an unplanned but amazing synchronicity. So tell me a little bit about how life presents these right moments for us for transformation.
Well, as I said, when we notice something that's irritating, when we
Mm,
notice something that's painful. I mean, when Jakob died, that was obviously very unexpected. He was my youngest brother. I have four brothers,
yeah,
and he was the youngest. And he left home at the age of 19, and then became an adventurer, and went traveling, and actually never came back. All we
yeah,
had from him was letters and some artwork. He was also very creative, very artistic. And then he sailed across the Atlantic with some other buddies who he met along the way, from Senegal to Brazil, or to Martinique first, and then in the end, well, he died in a diving accident, and he drowned on the 12th of January. And that is, of course, a significant date always. And I was in the process of of starting this series, this publication, and then I suddenly realized, oh, it's the 12th of January, and then suddenly it felt like really, really important to share that moment, because after he died, at first of course, I went through and for many years it goes through cycles. I went through the complete disbelief and that can't possibly be true, and then the anger, and how can someone who is so brilliant and creative and beautiful and healthy and young and the whole life in front of him, how can he just disappear?
Yeah.
That was to me impossible. I couldn't. I just, yeah. It's like my mind just couldn't integrate it. But then a few days after he died, I suddenly had this. He appeared to me. And it wasn't a dream. It was just. I had this presence. I was at the time also pregnant with my youngest daughter, and so that was when the grief hit. His girlfriend at the time was pregnant with his son, and there were
Wow.
two other of my sisters-in-law were also pregnant, and so we had 4 children born in that year.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So it was a significant year in our family, I would say.
Yeah.
and and it was like, also it was quite extraordinary. Well, when he appeared to me, it was like there was his face, and it was like in this golden light, and with this big smile, and telling me that he's okay, but also, now it's your turn. And what it meant to me was that he was one of these rare people, I would say, who really lived life on his own terms.
Mm.
So he decided he was going to go to Africa. He had planned to come back, but then sold his ticket and just continued.
Wow.
He,
Wow.
it was, it was quite a spontaneous thing, and I think he did what he had to do. But what it meant to me was that I was stuck in this, whatever my little life I was stuck in, that I had to step
Mhm.
out of, and um, and it meant that I had to find my own path. Not that I follow his, of course,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it was about giving me a kick up the backside to follow my path. And the other significant synchronicity uh, that happened there was that he had sent me. We exchanged letters. It was before the internet, so I had received a letter from him not so long before, where he told me that they're expecting a baby, and I had told him about mine, and he sent a drawing, and and I had given that drawing to a framer. I wanted that, and it was on the back of the letter, and I'd given that to someone to frame, and and it showed him. I'm sure it was him. It was a figure standing on the edge of the world, and with another figure in the ocean and pulling him out of the ocean. And that
Wow.
was really, I think he had seen his own death before.
Wow. Phew.
Yeah,
And that, oh my goodness, I just got chills. Oh, so this was a very powerful initiation
it
in
was.
your life.
It
Yeah.
was. But then it didn't, that was in 87. So it took another 12 years before I started, before I had this writing. But it's then all
Mhm.
the events that empowered me to then take a few steps that I needed to take.
Yeah.
It was then, no, this is my life, and I have to do what I have to do. You know.
Mhm. And
So
what beautiful things that have come from that. Extraordinary, extraordinary work that you've brought into the world and are bringing into the world because of some deep deep pain, and not just through your brothers, but through all the ancestral and your marriage and the offering. I see it almost just still. I'm going back to that seed, but the seed is unfurling now.
I think that is how it is for everyone. And it is
Mm.
continuing. I still don't know what's going to happen with this, you know?
Mhm.
And that's the beauty. But I now have really also, I would say the work has transformed me, obviously. And
Yeah.
it now, when I write, I also have become a writer in the process. I wasn't really a writer before. I was a translator. I was a literary translator, but it's very different to write your own work.
Oh, you're very prolific. You're an amazing writer, and it's complex, but so
But
accessible at the same
yes,
time.
but I can write like this because I trust the process. I
Mm.
actually, when I start a post, and with my previous thing of of course, if you feel inadequate, you are also a perfectionist. You know, the two go
Mhm.
together, as you probably know. So, and with that, I would have never been able to write like this. I would be exhausted.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
because I completely trust the process, I am in constant dialogue with this writing. You know,
Mm.
the
Beautiful.
writing, it is almost as if it is writing through me. And all a lot of also, I have had times when I also with Synchronosophy, I said, okay, enough. I've done enough now. Get a life. I'm talking to it like that. I'm talking to it and say, it's why does it always have to be me writing about this? So,
Well, you're receiving the call, and
yeah,
the opportune moment is, I've
yeah,
always said I'm a bad strategizer, and I love that you reframed that for me, because for me, I think it's just that I have to feel that opportune moment. I can't force
yeah,
something.
yeah.
So,
And there's
yeah.
something really important about the opportune moment. It's also the what is called in a sensitive phase. I think it was Maria Montessori who called it sensitive phases in children. I think it
Oh,
was her.
yes.
That you don't, and also in Steiner
Waldorf.
schools, the Waldorf education, you don't teach children something that they're not ready for too early
Hmm.
or too late. It's these things are really important, and that is synchronosophy as well. So you observe, you find these. It doesn't the growing and the unfolding and the maturing process doesn't stop only because your
Mm.
body has grown up, kind of, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
It
And
is,
it's so much more easeful. I feel a
yeah.
grace
Mm,
throughout this whole conversation. I feel a grace,
mm,
and even the kind of grace that in says, well, it's not that you're not excluding anything. I said something
no,
earlier about you're not doing this, but this, and you're like, well, actually, you're doing that too. Like, it's so inclusive.
yeah, yeah. And if something is not integrated, it's only because either it's still somewhere in the wilderness or in the permafrost, it's not ready,
Hmm.
or it is ready, but you are not ready, and you haven't
Yeah.
you haven't understood it yet. and
Hmm.
and it is, to me, it was so, and that's what I kind of wanted to say with the writing of this book. The Even though I already have the book, I've written
Yeah.
it. I've published it 11 years ago with all the workbooks and everything. But
Yeah.
this time, the writing itself teaches me new things.
Mm.
And that is the beauty of it, that it is really writing through me. But it's not like a channeling. I don't know
Hmm.
really how to explain it, but it's really a very interactive process for me,
Hmm.
that I go into it. I kind of know what I'm going to do. I have a kind of outline, but it's also very fluid. It's
Right.
like, if it doesn't go further, then I say, okay, there's probably something that I haven't quite understood, so I take a step back and then let something else take over. So it is really like that. So I don't know exactly what the book will be until I've written it,
Mm. That's
and I
wonderful.
love that. It's
Yeah.
an adventure. You know,
Right.
it's an adventure. As well as the inner world is an adventure. There's always so much to discover, but also the creative process. I just think, I just wish I could transmit that to everyone, because it's just such a beautiful thing. It's of course different for everyone, different mediums. It can be dance, it can be textiles, and I've also done some textile, but I knew always that textile is just, although I can do it and I'm good at it, reasonably good at it, but it doesn't. It's not like the writing. For me, it was the
Yeah.
writing, even though it was much harder for me to get through with that. It was much harder.
Wow. So
But
would you recommend those that are listening that are like, okay, how do I want to start? And so what's the process now? It lives on Substack. Is this do you want people to go back to the book you just held up on the Zoom screen, or?
I don't want anyone to do anything. So I don't want to tell people what to do.
But if they ask.
But if they ask. So what I'm planning to do, first I have to take a little break because it's pretty intense, even though it's writing through me, but it's also pretty exhausting. And I think my dear husband is also happy when I take a break because he gets nicer food. So um, but the next step for me is I'm going to write volume 2,
Wow.
and it will be about the practice. So the synchronosophy that lives on Substack now is the background. Should give. There's so much more that I could say to every single chapter, of course, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
The point is to get these snippets, and then it means to you whatever it means to you.
Yeah.
But you can always go back to it and check against it, because of course it comes from a place where it's already been digested, and where it's explained in a way that relates really to everyday experience, because that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
But what I will do is I have these workbooks,
Oh,
uh,
beautiful.
which are very beautiful, and I'm going to go through the whole map of the Nocturne, the map of consciousness as it came to me originally, and I will go through all these, then all the individual faculties, so that we go through all these nodes, and because they're like portals into the inner world, every single one, and then and that's and I hope that I can do it in a fun way, because I think it has to be fun. It has to be an exploration. It has to be. It's not something that you have to force yourself to do, but that you look forward to doing, and it is. And then also, I want to encourage people to find what their own channels are. I had a question the other day, I think it was Jamie Millard asked, and why are the 8 faculties? And I said, yeah, well, this is how it came. And yeah, this is how it came. It's true. But also it doesn't have to be. If you have another faculty coming in and say, well, hey, she's forgotten one,
Yeah.
well, invite it in. It's fine.
I love that. Everybody's welcome.
Everybody's welcome. And also, my practices are not necessarily someone else's practices. I was talking about it the other day. We have a little community project where we meet once a week, and we were talking about visualization and how to some people it comes easy, and I'm one of these people who is very visual, and I just close my eyes and see stories in my head. But other people don't, and you don't have to do that. It doesn't have to be visual. It can be either you can do a drawing, or you can have an association. You can just say, what does it remind me of? And then that reminder, that already creates a story.
Yeah.
That connection. So, and that's what I want to do in the practice part. So it will be this is the synchronosophy is the foundation. This is where it came from. This is why it came through me, even though I still sometimes think why. But
Oh, fine.
Okay, it did.
Well, I
It
mean,
wanted to. So it did, and there it is, and so I continue with it, and I continue to dance with it.
oh, so beautiful. Veronika, this is, I have to wrap this up, but I want to just say, I hope that in my mind, in my perfect world, these 8 nocturnes that you step into, I want you to pair with an animator and do these like 5-minute beautiful animations of,
I want to do that too.
that's how I picture it. It's like it has to
Yeah.
be animated in these little short oh my gosh, that would be my dream come true. So anyway, I'm just putting
I
it out
think
there.
no, I think that will happen. I actually have an animator in the family, but
Oh,
we haven't spoken about this. But I do have, and it doesn't have to be him. It's actually the long-term boyfriend of my daughter who lives in London.
uh-huh.
He is an animator. So I have access to
Yeah.
animators in my life, but I don't want to suggest it to anyone. It can also come from somewhere completely different.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and and I do think, and that's how I see it too. I would love, I mean, I love that you feel that it resonates with you, because when I started writing, I didn't know. I'd been
Hmm.
writing for 24 years, not on and off, of course, basically in a void. I
Yeah.
didn't, I had some websites which are no longer functioning. Um, and I had a few followers, and some are on Substack as well. But nothing significantly grew, and I think it just wasn't ready.
Yeah. That makes
It
sense to
wasn't
me.
ready. And then someone said, when I started to write again, and I talked to some friends, and they said, "Why don't you try Substack?" And I kind of reluctantly,
Mhm.
I reluctantly turned to Substack and started. And I didn't know what was going to happen, but I totally see it like that, that it will find its own people.
Yep. It already
It will
is. It
it
already
will
is.
find its own people. That's not
Yeah.
up to me. And I have, it's like when you write a book, it's your baby, and this baby is already 25 years old. So so I think it's about time,
Time to put it on a train.
and leave home.
Oh man, I love you, Veronica. This is just
Thank you.
extraordinary, extraordinary work, and it's such an honor to have spent
Love you
this
so much. Thank you.
wonderful hour and a half with you today. Hmm.